The bruise on Mira's cheekbone throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a dull percussion accompanying each desperate step through the darkened forest. 3 days since her father's hand had put it there. 3 days since Kale had stood in the great hall with tears streaming down her perfect lying face. One hand pressed to her flat stomach as she wove her fiction into truth. She attacked me, Kale had sobbed, clutching their father's arm. When I told her about the baby, about my bond with the Alpha King, she flew at me in a rage. She's jealous, father. She's always been jealous. Mira had stood frozen, her own hand instinctively covering the slight swell beneath her worn dress, the swell Kale had somehow discovered and decided to claim as her own. The swell that contained the Alpha King's child, conceived during his visit to their territory 2 moons past, in a single night of heat and desperate connection that Mira had told no one about, until Kale had found her retching behind the stables and put the pieces together. A root caught Mira's foot, and she stumbled, catching herself against a pine tree's rough bark. Her palms stung where they scraped, but she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Behind her lay everything she'd known. Her pack, her home, her name. Her father's final words still echoed in her skull, each one a blade. You are no daughter of mine, a liar and a jealous schemer, trying to steal your sister's destined mate with fabricated claims. Leave before dawn, or I'll have you dragged out in chains. She'd tried to explain. Goddess, how she'd tried. But Kale had always been the golden twin, the one with their mother's beauty and their father's favor, the one who smiled and charmed while Mira faded into corners. When Kale spoke, people believed. When Mira spoke, people looked to Kale for confirmation. The night air bit through her thin cloak, the only thing she'd managed to grab before slipping out the servant's entrance. No food, no water, no proof of what her sister had done except the life growing inside her, vulnerable and dependent on a mother who couldn't even protect herself. I'm sorry, she thought, pressing her palm flat against her stomach. I'm so sorry. I'll keep you safe. Somehow. Her wolf stirred weakly, exhausted from 3 days of running on empty. The animal part of her had been screaming to turn back, to fight, to make them see the truth. But Mira had learned long ago that her wolf's instincts led to nothing but more pain. Fighting Kale meant losing. Always. The trees thinned ahead, and Mira's heart seized when she spotted the boundary stones marking the edge of Thornwood territory. Beyond them lay Starfall Lands, the domain of the Alpha King himself. The same Alpha King whose scent she still remembered on her skin, whose golden eyes had held hers in the darkness, whose voice had rumbled mine against her throat before he'd left at dawn without a word. She'd thought it meant something. She'd been wrong. Crossing into Starfall territory without permission meant death. Pack law was clear on that point, but staying meant watching Kale claim her child, her bond, her entire life while Mira rotted in exile or worse. At least this way, there was a chance. A sliver of impossible hope that somehow the Alpha King might recognize the truth. Might recognize her. Mira stepped over the boundary stones. The change was immediate. A shift in the air. A weight of foreign magic pressing against her skin. She'd barely taken 10 steps into Starfall territory when the shadows between the trees solidified into wolves. 4 of them. Massive and dark-furred, with eyes that glowed amber in the moonlight. Border guards. Her wolf cowered, recognizing the superior strength rolling off them in waves. Please, Mira whispered, raising her empty hands. I need... She never finished the sentence. The largest wolf shifted, becoming a man with broad shoulders and a scarred face, and he moved faster than her exhausted eyes could track. Iron cuffs clicked around her wrists, cold and heavy, and rough hands shoved her to her knees in the frost-hardened dirt. Thornwood Wolf, the scarred man growled, sniffing the air. Trespassing without permission. That's a death sentence, little spy. I'm not a spy. I'm seeking sanctuary. His backhand caught her across the mouth, splitting her already cracked lips. Thornwood wolves don't seek sanctuary. They seek weakness to exploit. You'll explain yourself to the king. The other guards hauled her upright, chains biting into her wrists, and began dragging her through the forest. Mira's legs could barely keep pace. Every stumble earned a yank on the chains that made her shoulders scream in protest. Hours passed. Or maybe only minutes. Time had lost meaning, blurring into a haze of pain and cold and the constant, terrifying pulse of her heartbeat. Keep moving. Stay alive. Protect the baby. Dawn was breaking when the trees finally gave way to open ground, and Mira's breath caught despite everything. The Starfall capital rose before her like something from a dream. Towering spires of dark stone caught the first light, transforming into pillars of gold and shadow. Wolves moved through the streets below, hundreds of them, thousands, a pack larger than anything she'd imagined possible. And at the center of it all stood the palace, massive and ancient, its walls carved with images of wolves and moons that seemed to shift when she blinked. Somewhere inside those walls sat the Alpha King, the father of her child. The man who'd left without a word and probably wouldn't even remember her face. He has to remember. He has to. But the hope tasted like ashes on her tongue. Why would a king remember one forgettable night with one forgettable woman? Why would he believe her over Kale when no one else ever had? The guards dragged her through gates that groaned open at their approach, past courtiers who stared and whispered, through halls that smelled of cedar and power and something else. Something that made her wolf lift its head despite everything, a low whine building in its chest. Pine and winter frost and home. Mira's stomach dropped. She knew that scent, had buried her face against the source of it while he'd moved inside her, had breathed it in until it felt branded on her soul. The throne room doors swung open, and the guards shoved her through. She fell hard, chains clattering against marble, her knees cracking against the cold stone floor. Laughter echoed from somewhere to her left. Courtiers, probably, amused by the pathetic sight of the trespassing Thornwood wolf. Mira kept her head down, trying to catch her breath, trying to think past the roar of terror in her ears. "What have you brought me, Commander?" The voice rolled through the chamber like thunder, and Mira's entire body went rigid. Her wolf slammed against her chest, suddenly fierce despite its exhaustion, howling a single word that made no sense, and all the sense in the world. Mate, mate. Heat flooded her veins so intense her vision blurred, her skin prickled with awareness, every nerve ending suddenly alive, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the overwhelming pull toward the source of that voice. Heavy footsteps descended from somewhere above her. The scent of pine and frost grew stronger, wrapping around her like an embrace, and Mira's wolf keened with desperate recognition. "Look at me." The command resonated in her bones. Her head lifted before she could stop it, her eyes rising to meet the gaze of the Alpha King. Lachlan Starfall was exactly as she remembered. Tall and broad, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a face carved from granite and shadow. But his eyes, which had been warm gold in her memory, were currently flat and cold. The eyes of a king assessing a threat. Then their gazes locked. Gold blazed through his irises so suddenly that Mira gasped. His nostrils flared, chest expanding as he drew in a sharp breath, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound she felt in her marrow. He stopped mid-stride, his entire body going rigid. The cold king's mask cracked, revealing something raw and shocked underneath. "Impossible," he breathed, but the bond pulsed between them, undeniable, and Mira's heart shattered and reformed in the space of a single heartbeat as she understood what this meant. Her sister had claimed this man. Her sister was coming to take him. And the mate bond had just made that theft impossible to ignore. The throne room had gone deathly silent. Mira knelt frozen on the cold marble, her wrists still bound in iron, her body trembling from exhaustion and something far more overwhelming. The mate bond thrummed through her like a second heartbeat, each pulse sending waves of warmth cascading through her frozen limbs. Her wolf pressed against her skin so hard it almost hurt, desperate to get closer to the man standing 3 feet away. Lachlan hadn't moved. His chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, his hands clenched at his sides, and those golden eyes, blazing now, no trace of cold calculation left, remained locked on hers with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Impossible," he said again, but this time the word cracked in the middle. A murmur rippled through the watching courtiers. Mira caught fragments. "Trespasser, Thornwood spy, what's happening?" But she couldn't look away from him long enough to care. The bond wouldn't let her. Every instinct she possessed had narrowed to a single, overwhelming focus. Him. "Your Majesty?" The scarred commander stepped forward, his hand dropping to his sword. "Should I take the prisoner to the dungeons?" She crossed without permission, and Thornwood wolves are not to be. Silence. The single word carried enough alpha command to make the commander stumble back. Several courtiers dropped to their knees reflexively, whimpering. Mira felt the power wash over her too, but instead of the crushing weight she expected, it wrapped around her like a shield, like protection. Lachlan moved toward her, each step deliberate, his gaze never leaving her face. The closer he came, the stronger the bond surged, heat pooling low in her belly, her skin prickling with awareness, her wolf howling its recognition so loudly she could barely think past the noise. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that his boots nearly touched her knees, close enough that his scent enveloped her completely. Pine and winter frost and something darker underneath. Something wild. Close enough that she had to crane her neck to keep meeting his eyes. Those eyes that had held hers in darkness 2 moons ago. Those eyes that had looked at her like she mattered, just for one night, before he'd vanished with the dawn. "You," he breathed. "I searched for you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught. Her heart stuttered, and the careful walls she'd built around that single night of memory began to fracture. "I went back to Thornwood territory." His voice had dropped low, rough, meant only for her ears despite the watching crowd. 3 times. They told me no one matching your description existed. They told me I must have dreamed you." A laugh that sounded more like a sob escaped Mira's cracked lips. Of course they had. Of course Cale had made sure of that. "My sister," she whispered. "She—" Later. He cut her off, but gently, his eyes softening in a way that made her chest ache. "Everything later. First." He turned to the commander, and his voice hardened to steel. "Remove these chains. Now." The commander's face paled. "Your Majesty, she's a trespasser. Protocol demands." "I said now." The alpha command that rolled through those words made the entire room shudder. The commander dropped to his knees, fumbling for his keys with shaking hands, and Mira felt the iron cuffs fall away from her wrists a moment later. The relief was so intense that she swayed, her arms dropping limply to her sides. Lachlan crouched before her, bringing himself to her level, and the simple act of a king lowering himself to meet a prisoner's eyes nearly broke her entirely. He raised one hand slowly, telegraphing every movement, and his fingers hovered just above her bruised cheekbone. "Who did this to you?" The danger in his voice made her wolf shiver with something that wasn't fear. "My father," she heard herself say. 3 days ago, when he cast me out." Gold burned brighter in his irises, a muscle ticked in his jaw, but his fingers, when they finally brushed her skin with impossible gentleness, were steady and warm. "You're exhausted," he said quietly. "Starving. You've been running for 3 days, haven't you? Running to me?" She wanted to deny it, wanted to protect whatever scraps of pride she had left. But the bond hummed between them, and she found she couldn't lie to him, couldn't do anything but nod. Something shifted in his expression. The dangerous predator receded slightly, replaced by something softer, something that made her think of shelter and safety and the home she'd lost. "Can you stand?" Mira tried. She planted her palms on the cold marble and pushed, her legs trembling beneath her. But 3 days of running on empty had taken their toll. Her muscles gave out before she'd risen more than a few inches, and she would have collapsed entirely if strong arms hadn't caught her. Lachlan lifted her as easily as breathing, one arm beneath her knees and the other supporting her back. She tensed instinctively, waiting for the trap, the cruelty, the trick. But he simply held her against his chest, her head tucked beneath his chin, and turned toward the throne room doors. "Your Majesty." A thin man in advisor's robes stepped forward, his face pinched with disapproval. "You cannot simply carry a Thornwood spy to the royal quarters. Protocol demands interrogation, verification of identity, assessment of threat level." "Lord Vareth." Lachlan's voice was calm, almost pleasant, but Mira felt the tension coiling through his body where she pressed against him. "If you speak another word, I will remove your tongue myself." The advisor's mouth snapped shut. Lachlan strode through the parting crowd, carrying Mira as if she weighed nothing, as if he had any right to hold her so carefully. Her wolf had gone quiet at last, settling into a strange contentment that frightened her almost as much as the bond itself. "Don't trust this," she told herself. "Don't trust him. He left you once. He'll leave you again." But her head was already drooping against his shoulder, her eyes growing heavy, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her ear was the most soothing sound she'd heard in 3 endless days. The walk through the palace passed in a blur of carved stone and curious stares. Mira caught glimpses of servants pressing against walls, of guards snapping to attention, of doorways leading to rooms grander than her father's entire house. But exhaustion was pulling her under, and she couldn't hold on to any single image long enough to make sense of it. She must have drifted, because the next thing she knew, Lachlan was lowering her onto something impossibly soft. A bed? She realized dimly, piled with furs and pillows that smelled clean and fresh, and nothing like the cold forest floor she'd grown accustomed to. "Rest," he said, and his voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're safe here. I swear it on my blood and my bond." Mira forced her eyes open, fighting through the fog of exhaustion. He was standing at the bedside, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why?" The words scraped past her raw throat. "You don't even remember my name." Pain flickered across his features. "Mira," he said softly. "Your name is Mira. You told me while the moon rose, and I carved it into my memory so deep I'll carry it to my grave." Her breath hitched. The tears she'd been holding back for 3 days finally spilled over, tracing hot paths down her grimy cheeks. "Sleep," he murmured. "We'll talk when you wake. No one will harm you here." He turned toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. "I won't enter this room again without your permission. The guards outside face outward. They're protecting you, not imprisoning you. If you need anything at all, you need only ask." Then he was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind him, and Mira was alone with the impossible reality of what had just happened. The Alpha King had recognized her, had carried her through his palace like she mattered, had sworn on his bond to keep her safe, and somewhere out there, her sister was planning to come take it all away. Mira buried her face in the pillow and wept until the darkness finally claimed her. She woke to shouting. The voices filtered through the heavy door, muffled but unmistakably hostile. Mira sat up in the massive bed, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings and the lingering fog of deep sleep. Weak afternoon light slanted through tall windows, telling her she'd been unconscious for hours. "Cannot allow this insult to stand." A sharp voice, nasal and imperious. "Lord Vareth," she thought. The thin advisor from the throne room. "Lower your voice." Lachlan's response was quiet, controlled, but something dangerous lurked beneath the calm surface. "She is sleeping, and she needs rest." "Rest? Rest?" Footsteps paced beyond the door. "Your Majesty, you brought a Thornwood spy into the palace, into the royal wing itself. Her pack is our rival, her father a schemer who's been building alliances against us for years. This creature could be an assassin, a honey trap, a... Be very careful, Lord Vareth, about the next words you choose." The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. Even through the heavy wooden door, Mira felt the weight of Lachlan's alpha presence pressing outward. She carries my child. Silence. Complete, ringing silence. Your Majesty? My scent is on her. My air grows within her. And you? Lachlan's voice had gone soft in a way that made Mira's skin prickle with alarm. Have been standing outside her door for 10 minutes, calling her creature and spy loudly enough to wake the dead. I couldn't have known. Now you know. The footsteps resumed, but they were Lachlan's this time, moving closer to the door. Spread the word to the council. This woman is under my protection. Any who threaten her threaten my heir and will answer to me personally. Any who disrespect her disrespect their future Luna. Is that perfectly clear? Yes, Your Majesty. The advisor's voice had shrunk to a whisper. Perfectly clear. Good. Now leave, before I forget how valuable your administrative skills are, and remember how satisfying it would be to throw you from the North Tower. Rapid footsteps retreated down the hallway. Mira sat frozen in the bed, her heart pounding, her hand pressed flat against the slight swell of her stomach. He'd known. The moment he'd scented her, he'd known about the baby. And instead of rage, instead of accusations or demands for proof, he'd defended her. Publicly. Fiercely. A soft knock came at the door. Mira? Lachlan's voice, stripped of its earlier danger, holding only careful concern. I know you're awake. Your heartbeat changed. May I enter, or would you prefer I stay outside? Her throat tightened. When had anyone ever asked what she preferred? You can come in? The door opened, and he stepped through. Still in the same clothes from earlier, she noticed, as if he hadn't taken time to change. As if he'd been standing guard outside her room for hours. His eyes swept over her, cataloging, assessing. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because some of the tension in his shoulders eased. How do you feel? Better. She pushed herself higher against the pillows, suddenly aware of how filthy she still was, how wild her hair must look, how little she resembled anyone's idea of a Luna. I heard what you said. To the advisor. A muscle in his jaw tightened. He won't bother you again. You didn't have to do that. Yes. He moved closer, stopping at the foot of the bed, far enough to give her space. I did. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. You left. That night. You just left. You didn't even say goodbye. You didn't send word. And now you're acting like I matter. Like I'm... Her voice cracked. I don't understand. Pain carved lines into his face. I was summoned away before dawn. An emergency at the eastern border. Rogues attacking one of my villages. I left a letter with the house steward, asking him to give you my seal, my promise to return. When I came back 2 weeks later, they told me no one had received any letter. They told me the woman I described didn't exist. The house steward. One of Kale's admirers. Of course. My sister, Mira whispered. She must have intercepted it. She must have made sure I never knew. Lachlan's eyes flashed gold. Your sister has much to answer for. He moved around the side of the bed, still maintaining distance, and lowered himself into a chair by the window. Tell me everything, from the beginning. I need to understand what you've survived. So Mira told him. She told him about waking to find him gone, convinced she'd been nothing but a convenient body for the night. About the sickness that started a fortnight later, the tender breasts, the exhaustion. About hiding it desperately until Kale found her vomiting behind the stables and put everything together with that calculating gleam in her eyes. She told him about the Great Hall, about Kale's tears and their father's fury and the bruise that still throbbed on her cheekbone. About being called a liar so many times she'd almost started to believe it. About running through the forest with nothing but the clothes on her back. Certain she would die. Certain no one would care if she did. Lachlan listened without interrupting. His face remained still, but his eyes grew steadily more golden, and his hands gripped the arms of his chair hard enough that the wood groaned in protest. When she finally fell silent, her throat raw, he sat motionless for a long moment. Then he rose from the chair and moved toward her, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She couldn't. The bond hummed between them, and despite everything, despite every reason she had to be afraid, she didn't want him to stop. He sank onto the edge of the bed, close enough to touch, and raised one hand to cup her uninjured cheek. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, and impossibly gentle. "I failed you," he said quietly. "I left you unprotected, and you suffered for it. That guilt is mine to carry. But I swear to you, Mira." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, careful to avoid the bruise. "I swear on every star in my territory's sky, no one will ever hurt you again. Not your sister, not your father, not anyone in this world or the next." Her breath caught. Her eyes burned with fresh tears. "How can you promise that?" she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough." His gaze held hers, steady and certain. "I know you survived 3 days alone in the wilderness to protect our child. I know you faced execution to seek sanctuary instead of surrendering to your sister's lies. I know my wolf has been howling your name since the moment I left you, and I know—" His voice roughened. "I know the bond doesn't lie. You are my mate, Mira. Whatever else happens, that truth is carved into my very soul." The wall she hadn't known she'd built began to crumble. Her hand lifted, almost without her permission, and came to rest against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart beat strong and steady, the same rhythm that had lulled her to sleep in the throne room, the same rhythm that echoed in her bones. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've never been able to trust anyone. Every time I have, they've betrayed me." "I know." He covered her hand with his own. "And I know I can't prove myself with words alone, but I'll earn your trust, Mira. Every day, in every way I can. Starting now." He pulled back slightly, putting space between them again. "Tell me what you need. Food, rest, a bath, fresh clothes, healers. Anything. It's yours." She stared at him, this powerful alpha king who was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "A bath," she heard herself say. And you'll stay nearby?" "Not in the room. Just—" She swallowed, embarrassed by her own need. "Close enough that I know you're there?" Understanding softened his features. "I'll be right outside the door, as long as you want me there." It wasn't trust, not yet. But as Mira watched him rise and call for servants, watched him order a bath drawn and food prepared and fresh clothes found, all without ever raising his voice or losing that careful gentleness, it was the beginning of something that felt terrifyingly like hope. The bath was everything Mira hadn't allowed herself to want during 3 days of running. Steam rose from water that smelled of lavender and something sweeter. Moonflower, perhaps. The same blooms that grew wild along the borders of Starfall territory. She sank into the copper tub until the heat seeped into muscles she hadn't realized were knotted with tension, and for one blissful moment, she let herself simply exist. True to his word, Lachlan remained outside the door. She could feel him there, not through sight or sound, but through that strange new awareness the bond had woken in her. A warm pressure at the edge of her consciousness, steady as a heartbeat. It should have been unsettling. Instead, she found herself leaning into it, letting his presence anchor her as she scrubbed away the grime of her flight. The servants who'd drawn the bath had left fresh clothes folded on a chair. A simple gown of deep blue wool, soft as clouds against her fingertips. Clean undergarments. Slippers lined with fur. More kindness than she'd received in months, offered without expectation or price. When she finally emerged, pink-skinned and dressed in clothes that didn't smell of forest and fear, Lachlan straightened from where he'd been leaning against the corridor wall. His gaze swept over her once. Quick, assessing, lingering for just a moment on the curve of her stomach beneath the wool. "Better?" he asked. "Much." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Thank you." He nodded, something warm flickering in his golden eyes. "Food has been brought to the sitting room. You should eat. The healer will want to examine you after, to ensure the journey hasn't harmed the child." The child. Their child. Mira's hand drifted to her stomach without conscious thought, protective instinct surging. "Is that necessary? I feel fine." "It's precaution, not distrust." His voice gentled. "I won't force anything on you, Mira. But please, let me ensure you're both healthy. For my own peace of mind, if nothing else." She couldn't argue with that. Not when worry threaded through his voice like dark ribbon, not when she could feel echoes of his concern pulsing through the bond. So she nodded and let him lead her to a room where a fire crackled and food waited on silver trays. They ate in companionable quiet. Mira discovered she was ravenous, truly desperately hungry in a way she hadn't let herself acknowledge, while survival consumed every thought. She worked through bread and cheese and sliced meat, then fruit drizzled with honey, then a bowl of rich soup that tasted like someone's grandmother's recipe. Lachlan watched her eat with visible satisfaction, as if her appetite pleased him on some primal level. "The healer's name is Senna," he said eventually. "She's been with my pack for 40 years. She delivered me, actually." Mira paused mid-bite. "She must be quite old." "Ancient." A smile ghosted across his stern features. "And absolutely terrifying. My warriors would rather face a rogue army than her disapproval. But she's gentle with those who need gentleness." Before Mira could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Lachlan's head turned, nostrils flaring, and something in his expression shifted. Surprise, followed swiftly by a hardness that made her stomach clench. "Enter," he said, his voice losing all its earlier warmth. The door opened to reveal Lord Vareth, the thin advisor from the throne room. His pinched face was arranged in careful neutrality, but his eyes, pale and calculating, swept over Mira with barely concealed contempt. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty." He executed a shallow bow. "But a messenger has arrived from Thornwood territory. Beta Thornwood sends urgent correspondence." Mira's blood turned to ice. Her father. Sending messages already. Lachlan's jaw tightened. "Bring it." Vareth produced a sealed scroll from his robes, handing it over with another bow. Lachlan broke the wax seal. Mira recognized the Thornwood crest, the twisted oak tree she'd grown up beneath, and read in silence. With each passing moment, the gold in his eyes burned brighter, hotter, until they seemed less human than wolf. "What does it say?" Mira's voice emerged as barely a whisper. Instead of answering, Lachlan handed her the scroll. The words blurred, then sharpened into terrible clarity. "Your Majesty, it has come to my attention that my disgraced daughter Mira has fled to your territory. I must warn you that she is dangerous, mad with jealousy over her sister Kale's blessed condition. Mira attacked her own twin and attempted to harm the child Kale carries. Your child, Majesty. Kale is distraught, but recovering. She begs to see you, to present you with proof of the bond you share and the heir growing in her womb. We request permission to travel to Starfall under banner of peace, that you might meet your true mate and see Mira brought to justice for her crimes. Your faithful ally, Beta Aldrich Thornwood." The scroll trembled in Mira's hands. Lies upon lies upon lies, each one landing like a blow to her chest. Kyle was coming. Kale was coming here, with their father, bringing their poison into the one place Mira had begun to feel safe. "She's not pregnant," Mira said, her voice hollow. "She's never been pregnant. She's never even—" She stopped, shame burning her cheeks. "She's never been with anyone. Not like that. She's always been waiting for a mate worthy of her ambitions." "I know." Lachlan took the scroll from her shaking fingers, setting it aside. "The bond doesn't lie, Mira. My wolf knows exactly who carries my child, and it isn't the woman in this letter." But they're coming. Panic clawed at her throat. My father. He's been building alliances against you for years. You said so yourself. This isn't just about Kale's lies. If they can convince your pack, your advisors, they won't. You don't understand. She was on her feet now, pacing, the food in her stomach threatening to rebel. Kale is convincing. She's always been convincing. She cries at exactly the right moment, says exactly the right words. She made our entire pack believe I attacked her, that I made up my pregnancy to steal something that was never mine. Our father hit me. Her voice cracked. His own daughter, and he chose her without hesitation. What makes you think your people will be any different? Lachlan rose, moving into her path. She collided with his chest before she could stop herself, and his hands came up to grip her shoulders, firm but not painful, anchoring her in place. Because I will stand before my entire kingdom and declare the truth, he said, each word a vow. Because I will rip the throat out of anyone who calls you a liar in my presence, because the bond between us is real, and when your sister arrives with her padded belly and her false tears, that reality will destroy every lie she's ever told. Heat pulsed beneath Mira's skin, her instincts sharpening at the conviction in his voice. The animal part of her recognized something in him, not just mate, but protector, defender, king. Someone who would burn the world down before letting harm reach her. She's clever, Mira whispered, cleverer than anyone gives her credit for. So am I. His thumb traced a small circle on her shoulder, and unlike your sister, I have truth on my side. The healer arrived an hour later, a small, wizened woman with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to see straight through to Mira's soul. Senna, as promised, was both ancient and terrifying. She also had the gentlest hands Mira had ever felt, examining her with clinical efficiency that somehow never felt invasive. Healthy, the healer pronounced finally, pressing cool fingers to Mira's stomach. The child grows well despite the mother's ordeal. Remarkable constitution. Her sharp gaze flicked to Lachlan, who had insisted on remaining in the room. Strong bloodline on both sides, I'd wager. You're certain? Lachlan's voice held barely restrained tension. The stress of her flight. I've delivered hundreds of babes, boy. Don't presume to question my expertise. Senna straightened, her joints popping audibly. She needs rest, proper meals, and considerably less worry than she's currently carrying. The last is likely impossible given circumstances, but do what you can. After the healer departed, leaving behind a sachet of herbs for tea and strict instructions for nutrition, Mira found herself alone with Lachlan in the fire-lit sitting room. The intimacy of the moment pressed against her. This man who was her mate by bond, but still a stranger in so many ways, who had sworn to protect her, but whom she didn't yet know how to trust. May I ask you something? She said quietly. He settled into the chair across from her. Anything. That night, 2 moons ago. She twisted her fingers together in her lap. Why did you leave before dawn? You said mine, and then you were just gone. I woke up alone, and I thought. She swallowed. I thought I had imagined it all, that the bond was just heat fever, and you felt nothing. Silence stretched between them. When she finally gathered the courage to look at him, his expression had cracked open, raw and full of old pain. There was an attack, he said. Rogues at the eastern border. A village burning, families dying. My commanders reached me just before dawn with the news. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I left a letter. With your house steward, a young man, eager to please. He had my seal, my written word, my promise to return within the fortnight. Kale. The name tasted like ash. She must have intercepted it. I came back. His voice roughened. 2 weeks later, as soon as the rogues were dealt with. I searched your territory 3 times. Asked for you by name, described your face, begged anyone who would listen to tell me where you'd gone, and each time, I was told no one matching that description existed. Mira's chest ached. My father kept me confined after Kale's announcement. Said I was too unstable to be seen, I thought. Tears burned her eyes. I thought you had abandoned me, used me, and left me like I was nothing. Never. He rose from his chair and crossed to her, dropping to his knees before her seat. The position put him below her, made him smaller, less threatening, a mirror of his earlier gesture in the throne room. I have made mistakes, Mira. I should have woken you before I left. I should have trusted no one but you with my message. But I never stopped wanting you. My wolf has been howling your name every night for 2 moons, and I... He reached for her hand, stopping just short of touching, asking permission with his eyes. She gave it. Her fingers slid into his, and warmth flooded through the contact, the bond singing between them like a plucked string. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he continued. I'm only asking you to let me prove myself. Day by day, choice by choice. Let me show you what kind of mate I can be. Her walls, already crumbling, threatened to collapse entirely. This fierce king, kneeling at her feet, speaking words that sounded like vows. It defied everything she'd been taught to expect from power, from men, from life. My sister will try to destroy this, she heard herself say. Whatever this is between us, she won't stop until she's taken everything from me. Then we will be ready. His grip on her hand tightened. Together. 3 days passed in fragile peace. Mira ate regular meals, slept in the massive bed in the royal wing, and slowly began to believe that perhaps safety existed after all. Lachlan visited her chambers each morning and evening, bringing small gifts, a book of poetry from his library, a warm shawl in silver wool, a wooden wolf carving he'd made himself during sleepless nights at the eastern border. He never pushed, never demanded, only offered and waited, and let her set the pace. On the 4th morning, everything shattered. Mira was breaking her fast when the doors to her chambers burst open. Guards flooded in, not the ones who usually stood watch, but strangers in unfamiliar colors, their faces hard with accusation. Mira Thornwood. The lead guard's voice echoed through the room. By order of the High Council, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the crown and attempted murder of Lady Kale Thornwood. Her cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the stone floor. No. The word came out thin, breathless. No, this isn't... the king. The king is currently meeting with your father and sister. The guard's smile held no warmth. They arrived at dawn with evidence of your crimes. Lord Vareth has convinced the council to act in His Majesty's absence. Evidence. What evidence could Kale possibly... But Mira knew. She'd always known. Kale didn't need real evidence. She only needed the right lies told to the right people. The guard seized her arms, dragging her from the chair. Her hand flew to her stomach. Protect the baby? Protect the baby. And one of them laughed. Don't worry, he sneered. Lord Vareth has ordered the healer to examine your supposed pregnancy. We'll see soon enough whether the king's bastard is real or another of your inventions. Horror flooded through her, cold and paralyzing. They were going to hurt her baby. And Lachlan didn't even know. Help, she screamed through the bond, praying desperately that it worked. Lachlan, help me, please. The guards dragged her toward the door, and Mira realized with sickening clarity that hope, like everything else in her life, had just become a trap. The guards had barely dragged her 3 steps when the bond between Mira and Lachlan erupted with searing heat. Not her desperate cry for help echoing outward, but something crashing back. Rage so profound it stole her breath, protective fury that burned through every nerve like wildfire consuming dry brush. Then the doors exploded inward. Splinters of oak scattered across the marble floor as Lachlan burst through, his eyes blazing pure molten gold, his wolf so close to the surface that his features seemed to shift between human and beast. Behind him came guards in starfall colors, swords drawn, faces grim with readiness. Release her. His voice carried the weight of mountains, of ancient power, of an alpha king whose mate had been threatened. The words weren't loud, but they resonated through bone and blood, compelling obedience through sheer dominance. The guards holding Mira froze. Their grips loosened involuntarily, bodies responding to the command of a superior predator, even as their minds scrambled to resist. Your Majesty! Lord Vareth stepped forward from behind the arresting guards, his thin face arranged in an expression of false concern. We acted only to protect you. The evidence presented by Beta Thornwood and Lady Kale clearly demonstrates. I said. Lachlan closed the distance between them in 3 strides, and Vareth stumbled backward, his careful composure cracking. Release her. The guard's hands fell away from Mira's arms. She swayed, catching herself against the wall, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Lachlan. The voice came from the doorway, sweet as honey and sharp as poison. Surely you can see what she's done to you, the bond you think you feel. It's a spell. Dark magic. Our pack's healers confirmed it. Kyle stood framed in the ruined doorway, one hand pressed delicately to her swollen belly, the false pregnancy so convincingly rendered that even knowing it was padding, Mira's stomach turned. Behind her loomed their father, Beta Aldrich Thornwood, his face carved from the same cold stone as always. There is no spell. Lachlan turned slowly to face them, positioning his body between Mira and her sister. There is only truth, which you have twisted beyond recognition. She's poisoned your mind. Kale's eyes, so like Mira's own, down to the exact shade of gray, filled with practiced tears. The night you came to our territory, you came to me. We shared something beautiful. And now my own sister has stolen everything, used dark arts to make you believe. Enough. The single word cracked through the chamber like a whip. Lachlan's hands had curled into fists at his sides, the tendons standing out against his skin. I know who I held that night. I know whose name I spoke in the darkness. And I know, his voice roughened with barely contained fury, that your belly is nothing but cloth and padding, while my true mate carries my actual child. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Then Kale laughed. The sound was wrong. Too high, too brittle, fracturing at the edges into something that raised the hair on Mira's arms. You think you know, she said, her sweet mask crumbling to reveal something twisted underneath. You think you understand what's happening here. But I've been playing this game since we were children, and Mira has never once won against me. She pulled a small vial from her sleeve, the liquid inside gleaming sickly green in the morning light. The tea. Your precious mate has been drinking poison tea for 3 days. My agent in the kitchen's made sure of it. Her smile stretched too wide. By now, the baby should be. Mira's world tilted. 3 days. The herbs Senna had given her. The tea she'd drunk each morning to ease her nausea. Poisoned. Her hands flew to her stomach, terror clawing up her throat. Liar. But even as Lachlan snarled the word, Mira felt it. A strange weakness in her limbs. A subtle wrongness she'd attributed to stress and fear. Not enough to harm the baby yet, perhaps, but building. Waiting. I'm many things, Kale said, tucking the vial away. But I'm not a liar about this. In a few more days, the child would have been gone, and poor Mira would have been proven the fraud I always said she was. But since you've forced my hand. She moved faster than Mira expected. A blade flashed from beneath Kale's false pregnancy padding, a slim dagger that caught the light as she lunged past Lachlan's guard, aiming straight for Mira's belly. Time slowed to honey. Mira saw the blade coming, saw her sister's face twisted with hatred and desperation, and something that might have been jealousy festering into madness over years of comparison and competition. Saw her own death approaching, and worse, her child's death. The innocent life that had never asked to be conceived in the middle of this war. And something inside her refused to let it happen. Heat exploded from her core, not the warmth of the mate bond, but something older, deeper, a power she hadn't known existed until this moment demanded its awakening. White light blazed from her skin, from her eyes, from the very air around her. And when it struck Kale, her sister stopped mid-strike as if she'd hit an invisible wall. The blade hung inches from Mira's stomach, trembling in Kale's frozen grip. "What?" Kale's voice emerged strangled, her limbs locked in place by the light pouring from Mira's body. "What are you? This isn't possible. You don't have... I don't know what I have." Mira's voice came from somewhere far away, somewhere calm despite the storm raging through her. She stepped forward, and the light moved with her, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. "I only know that you will not touch my child." The padding beneath Kale's gown began to glow, then to smolder. She screamed as the false pregnancy burned away, leaving only flat belly and fallen cloth, the truth literally laid bare before the entire gathered court. "No!" Kyle thrashed against the invisible bonds holding her face contorting with fury and fear. "No, this was supposed to work. Father promised. He said the poison would. The alliance would." "You confessed to poisoning my mate?" Lachlan's voice cut through her babbling like a blade through silk. He hadn't moved, but his presence seemed to fill the entire chamber, vast and terrible as the wrath of kings. "You confessed to attempted murder of my heir?" Kale's mouth opened and closed, the magnitude of her mistake finally dawning. She looked to their father, still standing in the doorway, face pale, calculating eyes darting between escape routes. "I confess nothing," she spat, but her voice wavered. "It's her word against mine, and she's a known liar, a jealous creature who... The moon's witness." Mira didn't know where the words came from, only that they felt right, felt true, felt like something her wolf had always known. "I invoke the ancient right. Let the goddess herself reveal who speaks truth and who speaks lies." The light surrounding her shifted, changing from white to silver, from protective shield to something that hummed with divine attention. Overhead, the morning sun dimmed as if clouds had gathered, and through the windows, moonlight poured in. Impossible moonlight, the full moon's radiance blazing at midday. "You can't," Kale whispered. "That ritual hasn't been performed in centuries. No one knows how." But Mira did. She knew it in her blood, in her bones, in the ancient power that had awakened when her child's life was threatened. She extended her hand, palm up, and spoke words in a language she'd never learned. Silver fire erupted from her palm. It swept through the chamber, touching everyone present, the gathered guards, the cowering advisors, her father frozen in the doorway, Lachlan standing tall and unwavering at her side, and Kale, still trapped in light, screaming as the moon's judgment burned through her. Not burning her flesh, burning away every lie she'd ever told. Images erupted in the air above them like smoke given form. Kale intercepting the letter, pressing Lachlan's seal into hot wax before hiding the message in her chambers. Kale discovering Mira's pregnancy and immediately beginning to plan. Kale crying false tears in the Great Hall, performing devastation while triumph gleamed in her eyes. Kale consulting with their father about poisons, about dark alliances, about plots against the Starfall Kingdom that stretched back years. When the visions finally faded, Kale crumpled to the floor, her beauty stripped away by the truth's harsh light. She looked small now, broken. The monster revealed to be only a bitter, jealous woman who had chosen cruelty over love at every turn. "You were always the weak one," Kale spat, looking up at Mira with naked hatred. "Always crying, always running, always letting others decide your fate. Even now, with all that power, you're still nothing but a scared little girl who... I was the honest one." Mira's voice was steady, calmer than she'd ever heard it. "I was the one who loved without condition, who trusted without reservation, who believed that family meant something. That was never weakness." She turned to Lachlan, the silver light finally fading as her energy flagged. "I invoke the king's justice. for conspiracy against the crown, for attempted murder of the heir, for 3 days of poisoning your bonded mate. Lachlan's expression was terrible in its coldness as he looked at Chaol, then at their father, who had tried to slip away during the chaos, and now stood pinned between 2 Starfall guards. "Exile to the Hollow Lands," he pronounced. "Both of you. Stripped of pack, stripped of name, stripped of all protections granted to wolves who live under law. You will walk into the wasteland tonight, and if you are ever seen within civilized territory again, you will be executed on sight." "You can't." Aldrich finally found his voice, outrage overcoming his fear. "I am a beta. I have alliances, agreements, powerful friends who will not stand for. Your alliances were built on planned treachery against my kingdom." Lachlan's lip curled. "I have the moon's own evidence of your plots. Anyone who stands with you now will share your fate." Guards seized Aldrich, binding his hands despite his struggles. Chaol didn't fight when they came for her. She simply stared at Mira with hollow eyes, her hatred finally exhausted into something like despair. "This isn't over," she said, but the words held no conviction. Mira stepped forward until she stood directly over her twin. "Yes," she said quietly. "It is." She turned her back on her sister, on her father, on every poisoned memory of her old life. Lachlan was there when she swayed, his arms catching her before she could fall, his warmth wrapping around her like a shield. "The healer," she managed. "The poison. Senna is already preparing the antidote." His voice was rough against her hair. "You'll be fine, both of you." The last thing she heard before exhaustion claimed her was Chaol's distant scream as the guards dragged her toward the Hollowland's hungry embrace. She woke in Lachlan's chambers, not her own, surrounded by his scent, his warmth, his presence like a physical weight, anchoring her to safety. Moonlight streamed through tall windows, painting everything in silver and shadow. "The baby?" Her voice cracked. "Safe." Lachlan appeared beside the bed, pressing a cup of something warm into her hands. "Senna caught the poison before it could do lasting harm. You'll both recover fully." Relief washed through her so intensely that tears spilled down her cheeks. She drank the offered tea, different from before, tasting of healing herbs and bitter roots, and let him wipe the tears away with gentle fingers. "You saved yourself." His voice held wonder. "That power. I've never seen anything like it. The moon's witness hasn't been invoked in 400 years, and you called it like breathing. I don't know how." She set the empty cup aside. "It was there when I needed it. When the baby needed it." Luna's blessing. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "The old texts speak of it. Power given to those who carry royal heirs, the goddess's protection for the future of her wolves. It's been so long since anyone manifested it that most thought it legend." Mira stared at her hands, remembering the silver fire that had poured from them. "I'm not royal. You're my mate." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "That makes you the most royal wolf in my kingdom." The weight of the day pressed down on her, the betrayal exposed, the confrontation survived, the family she'd lost forever. But beneath that weight, something new had taken root. Not just safety, not just survival. Home. "The bond," she whispered. "It's still incomplete." Lachlan's eyes flashed gold, but he held himself still, waiting. "Only if you want it. Only when you're ready. There is no rush." "I'm ready." The words hung between them, charged with everything unsaid. Mira saw the struggle in his face, the desire warring with concern, the need held back by care for her fragile state. "You've been through too much today. The poison, the power you expended. I'm ready." She reached up to cup his face, feeling the roughness of stubble beneath her palms, the heat of him seeping into her skin. "I've spent my whole life waiting for someone to choose me, waiting to be believed, to be wanted, to be seen. I don't want to wait anymore." his control fractured. He kissed her with desperate reverence, one hand sliding into her hair while the other pressed against her lower back, drawing her closer. She tasted the salt of her own tears on his lips, the sweetness of promises kept, the future stretching before them like an open road. "I need to hear you say it," he breathed against her mouth. "Tell me you want the claiming, the marking. Tell me, I want to be yours." She tilted her neck, offering the vulnerable curve where shoulder met throat. "Mark me, Lachlan. Make me your Luna." A shudder ran through him. His mouth traced down her jaw, her throat, teeth grazing skin with aching gentleness. She felt him pause at the junction of her neck and shoulder. The claiming spot. The place where mates bound themselves together for eternity. "This will hurt," he warned, "and then it will be everything." "I know." His teeth sank into her flesh. Pain blazed through her, sharp and bright and consuming, a fire that burned through every defense she'd ever built. She cried out, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her body arching against his as the bond cracked open between them. And then the pain transformed. Pleasure flooded through her veins like liquid moonlight, warmth spreading from the bite mark across her entire body until she was drowning in sensation. She felt Lachlan, not just his arms around her, but his emotions pouring through the bond. Love so fierce it stole her breath, protective rage still simmering from the day's confrontation, wonder at the gift she was giving him. The bond sealed with an almost audible click, settling into her bones like it had always belonged there. Lachlan lifted his head, golden eyes blazing as he licked the wound closed. "Mine," he growled, the word vibrating through their connection. But Mira wasn't finished. She rose up, pushing him back against the pillows with strength she hadn't known she possessed. His eyes widened, surprise flickering through the bond, and then understanding as she lowered her mouth to his throat. "This isn't complete until it's mutual," she said against his pulse point. "Until you're mine, too." "Mira. Mine." She bit down. His groan shattered the silence of the chamber. Beneath her, he went rigid, his hands fisting in the sheets as she marked him, claimed him, made him hers as surely as he had made her his. Through the bond she felt his pleasure, his submission to this moment, his wolf howling with satisfaction at being chosen by its mate. When she lifted her head, licking his blood from her lips, the bond between them was no longer a single strand. It was a bridge, a fortress, an unbreakable connection that sang with completion. "Yours," he whispered, pulling her down against his chest. "My Luna, my mate." She settled into his arms, feeling the rightness of it down to her marrow. The bond hummed between them, warm and steady, no longer a desperate pull, but a settled certainty. They belonged to each other now, marked and claimed and bound by something older than law. Outside, the moon blazed full and bright, blessing their union. 1 month later, Mira stood before the gathered Pax in her coronation gown, Lachlan's hand clasped firmly in hers. The silver circlet on her brow proclaimed her Luna of the Starfall Pack, queen of the most powerful kingdom in the Wolf Territories. No whispers of lies now, no accusations of theft or conspiracy. Only cheers, rising like thunder from the thousands of wolves who had gathered to witness their king claim his true mate. Their daughter was born the following spring, under a full moon that seemed to shine just for her. She came into the world howling, strong and healthy, with her father's golden eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw. Mira held her for the first time and wept. Not from sorrow, not from fear, but from a joy so profound it transcended words. Lachlan wrapped his arms around them both, his lips pressed to Mira's hair, his heart beating steady against her back. "Our future," he murmured. Their kingdom prospered. Mira's Luna powers grew stronger with each passing season, allowing her to sense lies before they were spoken, to protect her people with moonlight shields, to heal wounds that should have been fatal. She was loved by her pack, Not for her beauty, not for her charm, but for her honesty and her compassion, and the quiet strength she'd always possessed but never been allowed to show. And sometimes, late at night, Mira would stand at the window of their chambers and think about the sister who had tried to steal her life. Kale was gone. Rumors placed her somewhere in the Hollow Lands, scraping out a bitter existence among the packless wolves who had nowhere else to go. Their father had not survived his first winter in exile. She felt no satisfaction in their fates. But she felt no guilt either. Lachlan would join her at the window, his arms wrapping around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Through the bond, she felt his constant presence, love without condition, belief without question, home without end. "What are you thinking?" he would ask. And she would turn in his arms, pressing her forehead to his, breathing in the scent of pine and frost and mate that had become more necessary than air. "I'm thinking," she would say, "that I finally know what it means to be believed." His smile was her answer, his kiss her confirmation. They had found each other through lies and loss and desperate hope. And now, marked and mated and bound for eternity, they had found something even more precious. They had found home.